Thanks everybody for joining us today. My name is Travis Jones. I'm one of the application experts here at MLC CAD Systems. And my goal today is to spend about 30 minutes with you guys, basically covering SOLIDWORKS Composer, showing how it can make your documentation process not only more efficient, more streamlined, but also allow you to generate higher quality content that better communicates your products to your customers and internally to your own organization. Now, I want to start off by talking about why technical documentation is important. I think we all have kind of an idea of why it's important, but it really is a pretty broad-reaching subject. And it starts with customer satisfaction. Anytime that we can create high-quality content that really effectively communicates our products, we can make our customer experience a lot better. I think we've all had the unfortunate aspect of sitting down and maybe reading through a confusing user manual or assembly instructions, being frustrated enough that you maybe have to call tech support or browse the internet. But if you can make your customers more independent and provide them with high quality documentation, typically that's going to lead to a much better experience. Not only that, but this kind of goes hand in hand. Anytime you can provide high quality information, it really reduces the burden on the number of inquiries that have to be made to your customer support line. And then finally, product revenue. Being able to have really nice, complete technical documentation can really increase your product revenue. Technical documentation is quite expensive to make, and it's a very time-consuming process. And so what I want to do is show you kind of some of the ways that SOLIDWORKS Composer can address these different aspects. Now, we know why technical documentation is so important, so why is it that so many companies struggle to create high-quality documentation through a very easy process? Well, one, it's very time-consuming. Many of you guys probably relate to the poor gentleman you see on the right, where you look at your technical documentation process, all of the different parties involved, the steps that have to be taken along the way, and it can be a very confusing and kind of overwhelming process. Not only that, but once you've gone through and you've actually created these technical documents, what you find is that even the smallest change to your final product can be quite difficult to update when it comes to your technical documentation, just because of all of the related documentation and the different processes that have to be addressed. This in turn leads to a very costly process when it comes to creating all this documentation. But what I've found in my personal experience and just talking with some of our customers is that the biggest aspect of creating technical documentation that they find difficult is that it's a serial process. And they find that they're always waiting on engineering to be able to provide them with the data they need to create their documentation. Many organizations basically have engineers that control all of the CAD data. Engineers are responsible for creating their engineering data, and they're also responsible for the integrity of it. It's kind of their baby. They don't want anybody else messing with something that maybe isn't theirs. So what you typically find is that you have a number of different departments and users within those departments that are constantly going to engineering and making requests for things like screenshots, exploded views, drawings, different diagrams. And I've been a part of this as well. And it's very distracting for engineers to constantly have to address all of these requests. This is actually a picture of my desk at my last job. So you can imagine that if I was in the middle of disassembling a firearm and somebody comes over and they want me to take a screenshot of a CAD model I'm not working on, that can be pretty distracting. And typically what it does is it leads to one of two scenarios. Either the engineer has to tell whoever's making the request that they're going to have to wait and he'll get to it later. And that winds up being very frustrating for your documentation department. Or the engineer goes ahead, he stops what he's doing, he makes that piece of information, whether it's a screenshot, an exploded view, whatever you need, but because he's probably in a hurry and it's not his top priority, it may not be the best quality. So what I want to take a look at today is how SOLIDWORKS Composer can not only streamline this process, but also make your documentation department more independent and allow them to work in a parallel process throughout the design process. So you can see here how the typical process basically relies on engineering to deliver maybe a final product or a prototype, or at the very least, at least wait until all of the CAD data is done being produced. And that's because it's often difficult to make those changes to your documentation once your CAD models start to incur changes. Well, with SOLIDWORKS Composer, what we find is that we can actually start the documentation process very early on in the design process. And that's because we're able to utilize our SOLIDWORKS models throughout this documentation process. But not only that, is that when changes come down the line, it's very easy to update your documentation. And that's actually something that we're going to take a look at today. So we want to look at how SOLIDWORKS Composer can streamline your documentation process and allow you to create higher quality content. Now, when it comes to the type of content that we can create with SOLIDWORKS Composer, the first thing we can create is just what I would call standard technical documentation. So things like assembly instructions, user manuals, parts lists, things that are going to be printed off and shipped with your product, or maybe they're just going to be saved into a PDF and they can be downloaded from your website. SOLIDWORKS Composer is able to handle this type of documentation really well, and this really isn't the focus of today's webinar. I will go ahead and show you just an example of what some of this documentation looks like. So a company called Resomin makes this piece of mining equipment you see here, the Bolter 77D. And this piece of mining equipment is basically designed to go inside of mines and apply like reinforcing rebar to the mine walls and prevent collapse. So it's a very intricate product. There's a lot of components that go along with it. And you can see that the parts manual itself is actually 534 pages. So quite a bit of information, but they were able to utilize SOLIDWORKS Composer to create this document and include parts lists, maintenance procedures, different wiring diagrams. So really nice piece of document here, but this just kind of falls under your standard documentation. Now, what SOLIDWORKS Composer can also create, and what's going to be the main focus for today, is your interactive technical communications. So this is really, really high quality information that kind of takes the ability to communicate your products to the next level. So we can create things like animations and interactive content. We'll take a look at interactive parts lists, operational procedures, and even how we can create a very interactive online experience. So I've got a sample document here that I want to share with you. And this is kind of the interactive content that Resomin created for their Bolter 77D. And if you notice, this is actually an HTML document, so it's opened up in a web browser. So you could put this on your website, or you could just supply this, you know, as a download, and it can be actually accessed through an internet browser without even having to be connected to the internet. Now, looking at this, you'll notice that they've got a nice high-quality image here that actually highlights as I hover over different components, but it's actually not an image. It's actually a 3D model. So I can actually go and rotate this entire piece of machinery around. I can zoom in and out and see different pieces of equipment. But down at the bottom, you'll also notice that I have 3 individual links that take me to different categories. So the first link here is replacement parts. Now, if I go ahead and click on this replacement parts, what I wind up with is this nice kind of wireframe vector style image. And if I move out over the screen, you can actually see that as I hover over different sub-assemblies, they begin to highlight. Now, the reason this is useful is imagine that you've got somebody out in the field. They're working on your Bolter 77D, and they need some replacement components. Now, if all they had was just a list of every part on this piece of mining equipment, I can't imagine how long that list would be, or how difficult it would be to search and find the right component. Maybe they don't even know the name of the component that they're trying to replace, but they know what it looks like and they know where it goes. All they have to do here is go and click on the individual subassembly that that component belongs to. And you can see we can actually dive farther into this subassembly. As we start to dive in, we start to see different bill of material lists start to pop up. And you'll see that it actually dynamically highlight, showing me exactly which component that row in the BOM is referencing. If I need to dive a little bit deeper into one of these subassemblies, I can click on that subassembly just to explode it a little bit further, all the way until I find exactly the component I'm looking for. And like I mentioned before, all of this bill of materials information cross highlights. I can figure out exactly what the part number is. It's a very, very efficient process. And once I've actually found the component that I'd like to buy, you'll notice that they even have an add to cart link listed down at the bottom. So all I would do here is click on that link. It would take me directly to the website, add that component to the part. And overall, this makes for a very efficient process. Now let's take a look at one of the other categories we have in this document, like maintenance, for instance. Let's say that you've got somebody who's trying to figure out how to remove a certain component, right? They need to figure out how to service your piece of machinery. Now, this could be a customer, or it could even be internally within your own company. But again, all we have to do here is click on the exact component that we're looking to service. And with this document, we can actually step through the different service procedures. Now, what's nice here is that you'll notice we have these really high quality images. If anybody has ever used a typical service manual, at best, the image you're looking at probably resembles something that was printed on a newspaper in the 1980s. They're often very difficult to try and understand, and it really leads to a more frustrating experience, where with SOLIDWORKS Composer and these nice interactive documents, we can simply step through all of the procedures and see exactly what it is that we need to do to service this particular component. Now, these aren't just 2D images. Let's say that I need a little bit better view of exactly what it is that I'm working on. This is actually a 3D image, so I can just rotate around. I can see exactly what it looks like from every angle, just to help me try and figure out the way that we need to service this item. So again, whether you're looking to provide maintenance procedures internally, maybe out on the shop floor, these could be assembly instructions, or you're looking to provide this externally to people who are utilizing your product, high quality interactive documents like you see here with Composer really help you better communicate these processes. And the last thing we can also take a look at here are operational features. So Composer is not only utilized by your shop floor or by your customers, but it can also be utilized by maybe sales to show off some of the features and functionality of your product before it's actually ever been produced and delivered. So here we can see the really unique features of the steering of this equipment that allow it to basically navigate through the mines around tight corners. And we can also see how the stabilizers and the placement boom are utilized as well. Not only that, but we can also create really unique fly-throughs, or in this case, just a nice marketing image that can be used on your website to really promote your products before you've actually finalized and produced the end product. So this is really going to help you guys generate interest. So overall, these interactive technical publications really allow for an interactive experience. This interactive experience can be online, it can be offline, but the ultimate idea is that you're creating very clear and easy to understand documentation that's going to provide a better experience with anybody who interacts with your product. Now, I've shown you just a few aspects of the type of interactive documentation that we can actually create, but I want to spend some time now inside of the actual software. I don't want to get too detailed on the actual procedures for creating documentation, but I want to show you how easy it is for SOLIDWORKS to leverage your SOLIDWORKS data. So the first thing we're going to look at is engineering data. How can we leverage data that already exists to better facilitate the creation of these technical documents? So inside of Composer, what we're going to do is we're going to open up a SOLIDWORKS model. So we'll simply go up to File, Open. And one of the things that you'll notice is that Composer is not just intended to be used by SOLIDWORKS, or rather for SOLIDWORKS files. It can handle Pro-E or Creo files. We can handle CATIA. We can handle Inventor. We can even handle a lot of neutral file formats. So we have a lot of different data that we're able to leverage inside of Composer. In this example, we're just going to go ahead and stick with a SOLIDWORKS assembly. Now, it's important to note here that while we're leveraging SOLIDWORKS files, we do not actually have the ability to go in and manipulate that engineering data. So engineers are very protective over their CAD data, but we don't have to worry about accidentally modifying any of their documents. Basically what happens here is Composer is going to go through, it's going to open up all of the SOLIDWORKS information from the file, and it's just going to copy it into Composer where we can work with it in our own environment. So here you'll see once it opens up, I've got my nice 3D model here of this boom assembly. I can rotate it around, manipulate it in a number of different ways. We can change the appearance of all this information, and maybe add shadows or ambient occlusion. But there's a lot of different ways that we can customize our SOLIDWORKS models to really increase the appearance and help better communicate some of these technical aspects. Now, over on the left-hand side, you'll notice that there is an Assembly tab. And what SOLIDWORKS Composer does is that it's actually able to preserve all of your assembly structure. So just as my assembly structure would appear in SOLIDWORKS, you'll see that it appears the very same way inside of SOLIDWORKS Composer. And this is important when we start to explode our assemblies out into different views and start to create our bill of materials, because all of that information is going to be preserved. Not only that, if you notice when clicking on each individual component, there's a properties window, and all of the custom properties for components that existed inside of SOLIDWORKS now exist inside of SOLIDWORKS Composer. So you've got engineers who are very detail-oriented, who have spent all this time entering in all the accurate information about each and every component, and you're able to leverage that directly inside of Composer. If you didn't have Composer, a typical process would require somebody in your documentation department to basically take all of that information and copy it over. Now, not only is that going to create a lot of work that somebody has to do, it's a duplication of work, but it's also a potential source for errors, whether it's copying in the wrong part number or the wrong description, accidentally getting your numbers crossed. It's just more information that has to be managed and updated. With SOLIDWORKS Composer, all we have to do is manage that information inside of SOLIDWORKS, and it will automatically propagate to all of our Composer items as well. Now, inside of Composer, the basic idea is that you kind of orientate your components and you modify them so that you can create nice, high-quality images. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just create like a nice home image here. And so what I can do is just position this however I like, and then up in the Views tab, I can choose Create View. You'll see that it basically takes a snapshot of what that looked like in time, and now I can use that view for a number of different documents, whether it's my user manuals, assembly instructions, things of that nature. But we're actually going to take this a little bit further. So inside of SOLIDWORKS Composer, our engineering data is actually our native CAD data. We're working directly with our SOLIDWORKS files, but we're working inside of an independent work environment. Now, we still preserve all of our assembly structures, all of our custom properties, all of the information that existed in our SOLIDWORKS model. We've got it in a dedicated user interface that's very easy to use and very easy to understand. Now, kind of going hand in hand with that engineering data, what I want to show you next is how we can create those interactive parts lists that you saw earlier. Oftentimes what you wind up with are users who may not have necessarily a technical background, or they weren't involved directly in the engineering process, trying to create these itemized bill of materials and annotating each individual component with balloons. Now, that can also oftentimes be very time consuming if you're not somebody who necessarily understands the assembly structure or what each component actually is in your product. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and create an itemized bill of material and annotate our assembly. Now, the first thing I want to do here is I actually want to change some of the appearance. Instead of having this kind of shaded view that shows a lot of detail, I want to switch over to a wireframe view that maybe just shows the outline for each component. So up here on the Render tab, I can just go ahead and change this to a nice silhouette image. Now, I don't really like the shaded background either, but everything inside of Composer is easily customized. Anytime you select on an aspect out in the graphics area, you get a properties window that allows you to change the properties for whatever you've selected. So I can really quickly go ahead and change that background color. I can maybe remove the ground floor from my display, and really quickly I've got this nice silhouette image. Now, typically when we're making bill of materials, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and start to explode the different components on screen, and it's a very simple process with SOLIDWORKS Composer. All I have to do is go and right-click on any component, and I can actually drag it in any direction that I choose. So I can start to drag these different components away from my main assembly. Now, just like you would expect with any SOLIDWORKS product, I can also select components from my assembly structure as well. So I can grab one of these cylinders and simply pull it away from my model, or I can grab this top cover as well and pull it out into space. Now, once I've got these components organized how I like, the next thing I really need to do is I need to go ahead and generate a bill of materials. And if you've ever gone through and manually created a bill of materials, you know how just kind of time consuming that is, with all of the information that has to be double checked and triple checked to make sure that it all lines up. But in SOLIDWORKS Composer, we have a number of tools that are called workshops. And these workshops are basically very specialized tools that allow us to automate what was once a very complex procedure. So we'll go ahead and utilize the bill of materials workshop. And the way that this works is that I just need to go select from my assembly structure the different components that I want to appear in my bill of materials. So I can individually select things like fasteners, or I can actually select just the top level assemblies so that none of their subcomponents appear in that bill of materials. Now, once I've selected the components that I want to appear in my bill of materials, I'm just going to go over to the right-hand side and hit Generate BOM IDs. And you can see that it actually automatically generates this bill of material based on the properties from SOLIDWORKS. So it knows the assembly structure, it knows the name of each component, it knows its description, it knows how many of them are in the assembly, and it automatically creates this bill of materials for me. Now, you can also customize all the information in that bill of materials by using the BOM tab. So you'll see that all of the custom properties that are available in SOLIDWORKS and even some special properties that are only available in Composer appear in this list, and you can simply pick and choose which items you want to appear in your BOM to customize the information that you need. So again, this allows us to leverage a lot of existing data, and we don't have to duplicate work. Somebody's already gone through, they've entered all this information in. All I've got to do is pick and choose what I need, and Composer is going to go ahead and automate that process. Now, I don't really like the layout of this bill of materials, but as I mentioned before, if you simply click on any item inside of your graphics area, the properties window allows you to customize the display. So if you look over here in the placement category, I can choose from a number of different locations for this bill of materials, or I can just choose the free option. And this actually allows me to go ahead and just dynamically drag this bill of materials and kind of place it wherever I want. I think that looks pretty good. Now, no bill of materials is complete without some annotated balloons to show which component the bill of materials is referring to. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and generate my callouts. Now, I don't have to manually generate these callouts. All I have to do is select my components inside of my bill of materials tree. And then on the right-hand side, I'll choose Create Callouts. And again, Composer is going to go ahead and it's going to automatically add those callouts because it knows which components are being referenced inside of my bill of materials. Over on the left-hand side, you'll see that I have a number of different options for how I want to display these balloons. So whether I want to display them on an arc, maybe I just want to display them bottom and left, or there's a really cool option as well for displaying them as parametric. And basically what this does is it automatically rotates those balloons around to show which components they're referencing, but it sticks nice and tight to the model. Now, at this point, I think everything looks good, but kind of the nightmare scenario for many people who are involved in the documentation process is what happens when change occurs, right? Everybody fears change, and it's not without reason for a lot of people using a standard documentation workflow. So we're going to go ahead and see what happens when we apply a change to the model that Composer is referencing. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just save out this view. So I'll click Create View here. And that's going to give me my nice bill of material view. And then I'll go ahead and just save this document. Now, inside of SOLIDWORKS, we're going to go ahead and replicate a change to this particular component. So you can see here I've got this boom assembly modeled up, but you'll notice that down in the bottom right, these cylinders don't actually connect to the plate. They're actually missing the knuckle components, and that's because I've got them suppressed right now. So if we unsuppress these so that everything is finally connected, we'll go ahead and save this document and see how SOLIDWORKS Composer is able to handle this change. So back inside of Composer, you'll notice that nothing's quite changed yet, but since we're leveraging our SOLIDWORKS data, all we have to do is go up to File, Update, and choose to update this SOLIDWORKS Composer document. We simply select the assembly that we're working with and hit Update, and Composer is going to reopen that document in SOLIDWORKS in the background, and it's going to start analyzing the differences between the data that it first started with and the data that is available now. And this is really nice because as somebody who may not have a technical understanding of the product, I don't have to analyze that assembly and figure out what's changed. Composer is able to go find all of that information for me. It's able to extract it. And once it's done, we'll actually see that it was able to update our Composer models. So here inside of my bill of materials view, you can see that those two knuckles now exist. And they also exist in my original view as well. And so what this means is that these views are automatically updating, and then these updates can now be pushed to all of the documentation that is utilizing those views. Now, one thing you may have noticed is that my bill of materials does not list the knuckle, and that may be for good reason. Maybe I don't want it to appear in this particular assembly document. But if I want to add these new components to my bill of materials, all I have to do is go select these inside of my graphics area and hit generate BOM IDs. And you'll see that they actually automatically get added to my bill of materials list. Now from here, I'll go ahead and just choose create callout, and I'll get my new callout. And now my BOM is automatically referencing all of this updated information. So this is kind of one of the big aspects that allows you to work in a parallel process while engineering is still developing a product. So parts list inside of SOLIDWORKS Composer, you basically have a really easy manipulation of geometry. It's very intuitive to just drag components around where they're easy to see, but you're also working inside of a complex 3D environment. Now, because we're able to utilize all of the information from SOLIDWORKS, we get automatic part list creation, and we can go ahead and handle those updates as they appear. So we can start our documentation earlier on in the design process. We don't have to worry about changes being made or components being added. Pretty much every time we fire up Composer, if somebody let us know that there's been a change, all we have to do is hit update, and that change will be reflected. Now, the last thing I want to share with you guys, I want to take a look at interactivity. And the reason I want to show this is because you saw how interactive the document was that we previewed earlier, where we can click on components and they take us to maybe different links, whether it's a parts list or to assembly instructions. But I want to show you how easy this is and how you don't necessarily need a background in coding or HTML to create these very powerful interactive documents. It's great and all if we can create those powerful documents, but if they're difficult to create in the first place, it's kind of a moot point. So what I've got here is actually a partially finished project that we're going to go ahead and finish out. And this is going to be a similar document to what you guys saw earlier, where basically I've got this same assembly that we've been working with, but I want to add some categories that show my parts list and allow me to dive down through sub-assemblies. And I also want to be able to show how to remove certain components like the cylinder. Now, all of this basically requires us to create links that kind of transport us around inside of our document. So to start off with, I'm going to add basically a couple of links down here. You can see I've already got the text for replacement parts and remove cylinder, but I want to add a little preview image that you can click on, and that will take you to another view. Now, if you look through my views over here, I've already got my parts list that allows me to dive into sub-assemblies, and I've got all of my instructions for removing these cylinders. If I want to add a link that takes me directly to my replacement parts, all I have to do is select that view and drag it on screen. And Composer is automatically going to create this link for me. There's no coding, there's no knowledge of HTML. All I have to do is drag and drop. And now when we publish this document, if anybody clicks on that window, it will automatically take them to the replacement parts category. Likewise, I want to show how we can remove this cylinder. So I'm going to go to the remove cylinder view, click on it, and simply drag it onto my screen. And that's going to automatically create a link that will transport you to the instructions for how to remove one of these hydraulic cylinders. It's very easy, very intuitive. Anybody can use Composer. Now I'm going to go ahead and just update this view. And the next thing I want to look at is I want to look at basically view 8, right? So this is kind of the start of the replacement components here, and it shows how everything starts to come apart. Now I want to add arrows that basically allow you to step through each of the operational procedures. And the way that I can do this is I can simply go up to my Author tab, and there are a number of 2D images that are included with Composer that really facilitate some of this automation, like this all buttons category. I can simply select this and really quickly add these buttons that will allow you to step through each of the operational procedures. Again, I don't have to have any knowledge of coding or how this works. I just drag and drop, and Composer does the rest in the background. Now, along with these buttons, I think I'd also like to add something that I manually link to an outside source. So imagine somebody's going through your parts list, or maybe they're going through your operational instructions, and they get to the point that maybe they either need to contact you to purchase a part, or they need to contact you for assistance. So I want to make it really easy for somebody to get to my website. And the way that I'm going to do this is that I'm going to go back, and on my workshops window, I'm just going to go to the image library. I just want to add an image of my company logo to the top right-hand corner. But I want this image to be interactive. I want somebody to be able to click on this image and take them directly to my website. Now, the beautiful thing about Composer is that any item in the graphics area can be utilized as an interactive component that links to something else. So all I'm going to do is left click on this image, and over on the left-hand side, you'll see that in the properties, there is a link category. And this appears for any component inside your graphics area. Now, inside of this link category, I can basically go and choose to link to a number of different items. So whether I want to link this icon to maybe a file that gets downloaded, maybe I want to link it to a website, maybe I want it to be an FTP site where the customer can upload documents for me to review. In this case, we're going to use a website, and I'm just going to have this icon link to the Resumen website. That way, if anybody needs assistance, if they need to contact our company at all they have to do is click on the icon up in the top right corner, and they can immediately be transported over to the website. Now, I've added this logo and I've added these links that allow you to navigate through all of the different views, and I'd really like both of those items to appear on all of the views that I've already created. Well, instead of having to go to each and every view and manually add those items, all I have to do is select the items that I want to add to other views, and then I can simply select all of the different views that I want to add these items to. Once I've selected these different views, all I've got to do is hit Update, and all of those different items now get added to each and every view. So this is a really easy way to customize a lot of the different information. And like I said before, you don't really have to be somebody who has a knowledge of HTML or the different coding processes. All of this information is very intuitive. And once you've finished, all of this information can be published to a variety of formats. So it automatically publishes to HTML if you want to provide this information on a website. You can publish this to PDF, or you can just save it out as an SVG file. And then there's actually a nice simple viewer that anybody can utilize to view all of this information. So with Interactivity in SOLIDWORKS, you can link to a number of different external sources. You can link between different view types, and you can link custom views to get very specific control over your documents. And I've actually got an example of what that finished document looks like here, and we'll go ahead and open that guy up. All right, so here's what that document we just utilized looks like. I'll drag it over from my other screen. And you can actually see how clicking on those different replacement part windows takes us over to the parts list, where we can then go through and dive into different sub-assemblies and see all of this information. And you guys saw how easy it was to create that type of information. It wasn't difficult to link between different views. It wasn't difficult to add these different icons that navigate us between all of the steps. And so it's a very simple process for creating a very good way to effectively communicate all of your products, both internally, maybe out on the shop floor, or externally to customers, vendors, suppliers, anybody who needs to access all of this information. So really what I want you guys to take away from this webinar is just the company-wide impact that SOLIDWORKS Composer can have. And it really starts with allowing your engineers to spend a lot more time designing and less time having to provide data to a number of different sources. And not only that, but you also give your engineers a way to effectively communicate their very technical products. Third, you can also allow your company to produce a lot more documentation, and not only more documentation, but higher quality documentation without the need for a lot of additional personnel or processes. It actually simplifies your documentation process quite a bit. And then third, your content creators can spend a lot more time generating this high quality documentation, and much less time will be spent chasing down engineers and fighting to try and get up all that updated information. And all of this has a really good impact company-wide, because it basically allows customers, resellers, partners, and other product users to have a much more efficient and more engaging experience with your products. Anytime you can provide better information, better communication about your products, it's a much easier process for everybody involved, and it really gives people a lot more confidence in your products, and it's going to encourage them to be a lot more independent, and they're less likely to go out and search on YouTube or search different forums and possibly find information that may not be accurate. So you'd much rather provide that accurate information yourself. So I appreciate you guys hanging out with us today.